joined this half hour by one of my mentors, probably one of the smartest people I know down in the legislature. He is the Vice Chair of Finance, Mr. Clay Riley. Welcome in, Clay.
Good morning, Bill. Good morning, John. How are you guys doing today?
Very good. Thank you, Clay.
Clay, we had a meeting recently between House members, senators, and the governor and the governor's office talking about PEIA. Can you tell us about some of the things you took from that meeting?
I think it was a part of understanding PEIA is that it's really a benefit. And, when we as the legislature looked at this issue a couple years ago, we had gone a decade or so without really any increases in premiums. We tried to work to find a way to just get some stability to it. And I think one of the things that came out of that was, hey, we're going to set some parameters, and it's really not what I would consider an insurance program. I mean, because we don't run it with loss ratios and that sort. But what we do is we provide a benefit as an employer. And I think what you came out of that meeting is that, and when we discussed, or we heard the proposals from, what the governor's office is looking at, is those are really benefit decisions of, where you land from, whether it's incentives or penalties, however you want to look at it, from healthy choices and exercise and that sort of thing, to premium allocations, to various other potential agendas. How do you administratively that program? And I think that's why you had the board. I believe that's why the board is there and why the board has been set up, so that they can evaluate those benefits as an employer and an executive branch employer and offer those as a benefit to the state of West Virginia employees.
Yeah.
Bill?
Good morning, Clay. I think I've been sitting around this table for the last 2 or 3 years, and no subject has gotten as much airtime as what PEIA. My question, I have 3 or 4 questions. I was talking to Mike Hornby before we went on air about the meeting that we had with the governor, and there were a lot of Senate and House members there, and you just got through making the comment that the proposals presented by the governor. The question basic question is, how much was the governor listening to other ideas, or does he have his mind made up of what he should be doing with PEIA?
I think the governor and the governor's staff have really dug in to this issue. I mean, I came away from that meeting complimenting that I thought they really, understood where some of the challenges lie from an operational standpoint. So I think they've done a good job of digging in. Now, I think when you describe what the fix is, as people use, and I use that in air quotes, I think that's where it comes into, it's a benefit, not really an insurance program. And I think that's where I think the challenge comes, and that's why you have the PA board, the finance board. And I think there may be some things that need legislative action, but I don't know how many of those things need legislative action. And I think they haven't completely formulated their plan. That's why I believe they, had the meeting, is so they could get some feedback and listen, on the things that may take legislative action, and I believe they've met with other stakeholders, and they're meeting with other stakeholders. I know they specifically reprerenced some of the teachers' unions and public employees from in the state as well as local, is that they were meeting with these stakeholders to get feedback. So I do think they are listening, Bill.
So that's good to hear, Clay. So I gather what I'm hearing now, there's at least a shift that it's going to be an administrative issue more so than a legislative issue. Is that correct?
Well, I think when you look at what the proposals of which they're discussing and considering, and they've not come to any conclusion, I think a lot of them are just administrative. How do you categorize? How do you break into tiers? I mean, those things don't take legislative action. There may be some things that do, but I don't, at this point, until you have a final formalized plan of being able to evaluate, I think, like I said, they were doing a lot of listening, and here are some concepts and things where we think we can stabilize some of the cost And I think that's always a good discussion to have, and especially when you're blue skying these things, to come up with where you think you may make improvements. And some of it's just tweaking around the edges, and I think that's good, and that's fine. And that's where you always have to look for operational efficiencies. And I think a lot of them are administrative that the board will take out.
Yeah. This is John. Good morning. Now that the big, beautiful bill is a reality, on the financial side of things, what's the impact that you see so far between the impact on Medicaid, where the White House says steadfastly there will be no cuts in Medicaid, take them at their word, I guess, and then there's just the fact that West Virginia lives off the largesse of the federal government as a large part of its budget. What's in store for us from this?
You know, it's a really good question, and so I can tell you I've been digging into that since it's passed on Thursday. One of the things I've learned as a legislator is until it's done, I don't spend a lot of time wasting effort on what our concepts are. But I can tell you, I think there will be some fiscal impact that the state just needs to figure out how they want to address. One of the biggest things I was concerned about was the elimination of the provider tax, because that provides a significant amount of revenue within the state that allows it to match federal dollars. And so currently we're at about 5%, if I'm not mistaken, and it drops to 3.5% by 2032. So starting in, I think it's 2029, because the first year is dropping it from 6 to 5.5 and then to 5. So I think come 2029, there'll be some revenue that we'll have to figure out how we're going to replace to make those matches, or the executive branch will have to figure out what changes to the Medicaid program that they want to make in order to address those. So it's really an operational issue from that side, because the executive branch does run, the Department of Health, they run, or Human Services, they run the Medicaid program, and so they establish the plan. And the government, the legislature's role is to fund it. And so I think figuring out the balance between those two is where we'll be over the next couple of years.
Yeah, one of the balances I understand is how much will this $50 billion that will go to all the states offset to the tax loss. Do you have any sense at all how much West Virginia will be getting out of that $50 billion? And will that compensate for the loss?
So I broke up there for whatever little bit of a reason, and so I think you will see some additional tax revenue that will generate from that. Whether it'll completely offset, I think, it'll take a little bit further analysis. Like you said, it passed on Thursday, so I've been digging into it over the weekend, and we have our staff digging into it just to see where we think we'll end up. And again, as some of these programs begin to implement, before we actually need to hit that button that says, these are the changes we need to make. I think some of the decisions on SNAP will come a little bit earlier, because the states will be required to meet part of that. That what used to be 100% federally funded is now going to be partially funded, and that's based upon your error rates and some other things. And I think West Virginia, we're sitting at a 25% match. So you're looking at, eventually we're going to have to hit probably another $100 million or so. Within that program would be my estimation at this point.
What about the big infrastructure spending that was passed in that, not the Green New Deal, the other one?
In the IRA?
Yeah. Did they survive, do you know?
Yeah, there are some changes to it. That's what I was actually reading into. That will be coming down. I think you'll see some reduction in SRF, which is the state revolving fund, available funds. I think you'll see some reduction in that. That's primarily what a lot of water and sewer projects are funded through the state. That's one mechanism of funding it. So that's probably, if the changes occurred the way I believe they occurred, that's probably a loss of around $20 to $30 million that we'll have to figure out, just how we make that up, or other alternatives to look to be able to, because there are other funding programs that you can go to. It's just a different type of funding.
So, Clay, over the weekend, obviously, there was a horrendous flood down in Texas, and in West Virginia. We've had our own issues in West Virginia with flooding down in the south and up in the north now. Big picture, you're in this water business, you're in the stormwater. How do we fix the problem of flash flooding? Is there a fix? And what can we do better in this state?
Yeah.
Did we lose you?
Is
Sorry,
really
you cut
hard.
out there, Clay.
I'm sorry. Because does that mean fix is 0 probability, or never happening, or once every 10 years or 100 years?
Right.
And so defining what that fix is, we ultimately, I think the way to improve it, let's talk about that rather than fix it, is you have to figure out how these watersheds handle their flows, and whether it's a responsibility of the county, a responsibility of the city, a responsibility of the state, a combination thereof, and ultimately who owns it. I mean, you guys see this in the EP because you've been under MS4 regulations. You're used to seeing what happens in Maryland and Virginia with their stormwater regulations. As you go down into other areas of the state, stormwater and dealing with stormwater runoff is prevalent. And when you get into other areas of the states, whether it's the conservation agency cleaning out streams, and you look down in the southern part of the state, you have really steep hillsides. So you get a microburst that dumps 2 or 3 inches. You don't design the culverts and that sort to handle those types of floods. I mean, you can, but the problem is it becomes a benefit cost analysis, and how much money do you want to spend? Obviously, there's not enough money when you're talking about the loss of life, but there is a reality of what you got to design for and what you can plan for. Right now, we plan on 10 years on a flooding event. Like, that's not enough. I think we need to start looking at 25 and 50 years. But there's a cost that comes to that. So whether it's a development cost or a public cost, whether you're talking about culverts and detention basins and that sort, and runoff. And that becomes a very challenging thing, especially when you start talking about, who's going to pay for it. I mean, I know, and I've heard it from the Eastern Panhandle crowd a lot about, what you guys call the rain tax or stormwater utility fee. And that's in various places, and they're just not popular because it's water that hits the ground. But, I mean, it's a contributing factor. So ultimately you decide how you're going to pay for it, and the ownership of it. That's the problem that you really come down to.
But Mike introduced that with the flood in Texas. There are 3 parts to the equation, is there not? One would be the forecast, which clearly resides with the federal government. Second would be a notification, which I think is a partnership between the federal government and state. And third would be the response, would be the local government. And so what you've been describing is a third of this 3-legged stool. The other 2-legged stools, I think, are kind of out of the hand, at least the local government.
Well, to some degree, Bill, you're also talking about prevention, and when you start talking about the prevention and how you design and how you handle those floods. The other part, one thing I would say, is the notification part is something that can be dealt with pretty easily, in my opinion. But you just have to figure out the mechanism to do it. It's very cheap to have notification systems sent out, to have automated text. But a lot of people want to have that, or they opt out of those types of things. So you can improve on it, but the fix on that second part, the forecasting you're correct. That is a federal issue, and that's a NOLA issue. And I think from that standpoint, we can just work with this from a state perspective. We can just work with them better from a mapping perspective of our floodplains and what mitigation strategies we have to prevent the loss of life when they do happen.
Clay, if rain dumps 6 inches an hour for 4 hours on top of a mountain, is there anything that we can actually do to prevent the water coming downhill?
Get out of the way.
Yeah.
I mean, it is get out of the way. There are some things that you're just not going to plan for. You're just not going to say, well, we're going to assume 6 inches in an hour, because then, you're taking up so much land, you're taking people's property, you have to do so many different things.
And it doesn't happen in the same place.
It doesn't happen in the same place. And so now what you're talking about are design standards. I think we could increase some of our design standards and what we need to plan for, but you're not going to solve for 6 inches in an hour or 4 inches in an hour, those microburst things that are just unbelievable. Now, what you can do is you could have good maintenance, and if you're clearing out floodways, and then so trees don't get caught on bridges or in culverts, and then exacerbates the problem. Those are things we can do.
Well, there's a fourth part, Bill, if this is where we're going, to evacuate, you have to have some place to evacuate to. And depending on where you are in this state, it just means going to live in the woods, right? I mean,
or higher ground. But what happened in Texas, at least my understanding, is that the notification part of this triangle broke
and that's
off.
relatively flat. It is in hill country, but it's relatively flat. Here, we've
Compared
got these...
to West Virginia.
Yeah, and...
well, it's pretty hilly in Kerrville area.
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time there. It's quite hilly, so...
Yeah, the notification problem was an issue down there from the information that I've read. Of course, I'm reading the same thing that you guys are, and
exactly
looking into the news. But it appears that may have been some of the issue for some of the evacuation. But, in West Virginia, we have a program through each of your regional councils. There's 11 regional councils in the state that they do a hazard mitigation study every 5 years. And part of that is, I think the last time was in 2023. Part of that is, how do you evacuate areas, and what are the evacuation plans? And so we have funded that and done a decent job, I think, of saying, okay, let's look at how these evacuation plans work for your region. Like over in your area, it's Region 9. And so they'll have Berkeley, Jefferson, and Morgan County. In my area, it's Region 6, which would have, the Mon, Marion, Harrison area. And so you break it down into regions so that, because what works in the EP doesn't work.
We lost you again, Clay. You there?
Yeah, I'm there. I said what works in the EP in the Harrison County may not work in Welch, and vice versa. So that's why you break those mitigations down by region.
How is the recovery going in those parts that were flooded just a few months ago in the southern part of West Virginia? What is that recovery effort?
Part too.
It's consistent. It's hard. It just takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of consistency to stick with it. I mean, my understanding and the people that I've talked to is they are making progress. It's slow but sure. So, it's going to take a while to rebuild. I know some of the infrastructure they're improving down there as we speak, because I'm familiar with that. And I know I've heard the county commissioners talk about they're getting back on their feet and they're rebuilding and going to rebuild better. So unfortunate situation in West Virginia, but my understanding is they're continuing to plug along.
Yeah, along that line, Clay, how much has FEMA played a role in the recovery effort in southern West Virginia?
Well, they play a significant role. I mean, obviously, it's a federal emergency management. I mean, they do the major declaration of disasters, and, there's a portion of that we've built our system that there has to be a state component and there has to be a federal component. And down there, it took a little bit to get through that initial assessment, but that wasn't because we didn't need the immediate funds. We had provided some immediate funds for recovery to the governor's office in previous legislatures, and as well as this one. So there were some funds there that we didn't have to have immediate FEMA dollars, unlike Kentucky. Now they've been able to come in, do the assessment. I think we get a higher reimbursement rate and a higher portion than what Kentucky does. So they play a significant part. I think some of these changes as they move forward with the big, beautiful bill, I think will be important to figure out how that impacts us in years down the road, though.
That's kind of the basic of my question. How do you anticipate it will change down the road?
Well, it's going to. I think they are going to continue to push back and have more states take more of a lead on recovery efforts. I think you'll see some increased participation in states. I think that's yet to be built out. So, I mean, I can't completely answer your question, but that's what I would anticipate the push being.
Is there a lot of FEMA housing brought in for the folks in West Virginia?
There was in 2017 when that hit the Greenbrier and Clay County and other areas. I don't think there's been as much in the past couple years because it's not been as widespread. I think they provided funds. You saw the governor's office provided $500,000 last week for housing assistance. So I don't think as much FEMA housing has been brought in because it's not been necessitated as it was after the 2016 floods.
Clay, You're the vice chair of finance. What are you I know you've got your fingers in a lot of pies down in the legislature, but what specifically is finance working on in the interims, or what are you guys working on for next session?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, we don't stop. We do take a week or so and kind of catch our breath, and then we begin to start planning on what the next budget looks like. We'll start in budget hearings. The executive branch will have their all budgets submitted in September, and then we'll start in budget hearings from there on out. Right now, what we're doing is we're looking at an evaluation of what we call special revenue funds, and looking to see where some of those funds lie with their balances. You know, if you have the ability to spend what we call spending authority of $4 million, and you have $12 million sitting in your account, either your fees are too high, you're holding too much money, or you have a project that you're getting ready to do, and we want to know the status of the project. You know, one of the things I think that's been a philosophy of this legislature since I've been in is, you know, is making sure that as much money stays in the pockets of West Virginians as can be. You saw that with the tax cuts. Again, that doesn't mean you can go completely to zero on fees, and there's a path to zero on income tax, but it's going to take time. So right now what we are currently looking at is making sure of where some of those special revenue comes. As we come into September and October, some of the things we're looking at is the funding of Health and Human Services and how those agencies are funded, specifically with some of these changes to Medicaid. We want to look at what that looks on a long-term projection. We're also looking at what our 6-year plan looks like and where we expect some of the finances to go for revenues going forward.
And how much are you actually interacting with the agencies when you're doing this? Are you working with them, or is this just internally within your committee?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I mean, we work collaboratively, and we'll work, you know, I met with the Secretary of Revenue last week as we were talking about revenues and that sort of thing. So it's a regular collaboration, but we will also go, you know, we'll meet with them and we'll go over what we think and we'll hear what they think, and then we'll go back and we'll do some internal work, and then we'll meet with them again. So I wouldn't say it's an everyday collaboration. It's a regular collaboration, but going away and doing your homework, kind of like in school. You see the teacher and you go away and do your homework. So.
Clay, thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything else you'd like to add that you're working on right now?
You know, a whole lot, actually. I mean, there's a lot of things that are going on across. I think you've seen a lot of, I'm trying to pay attention to what a lot of our members are doing, specifically in finding ways when they have ideas to improve. You know, one of the things we've talked about is the school aid formula, which impacts budgets. We're also looking at some of the mental health issues within education and what, you know, we're funding it in 6 different pots, and is that really the most effective way? And so I think trying to get some efficiency out of the dollars that we use and squeeze every last drop of efficiency is really what I'm working on right now with a number of people.
Clay, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you in the next couple of weeks.
Thanks,
anytime.
Clay.
Hey, guys, thank you very much. I always appreciate coming on WRNR.
Thank you, sir. Delegate Ryan Browning will join us next with some psychedelic news. You're listening to TV 10 and WRNR.